आज हम लोग पढ़ेंगे पॉलिटी में हम लोग पढ़ने वाले हैं। लेसन फर्स्ट से हम लोग शुरू करते हैं। पॉलिटी में हम लोग आज पढ़ना होगा।
तो तू ही होगा
भाई बस
आ गइल बा बोले में कट के बोल कर आदमी अपन जिंदगी जियल चाहिए।
हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड्स।
तो बहुत बढ़िया से जियल चाहिए।
हिस्टोरिकल बैकग्राउंड्स में the Britishers came to India in the 1608 as a traders in the form of the East India Company, which had the exclusive rights of the trading in India under a character granted by the Queen Elizabeth in 1600. Queen Elizabeth in 1600. Queen Elizabeth in 1600. Elizabeth in 1600. Or in 1765, to company which till now had purely trading functions obtained the Diwani, rights for over revenue and the civil justice of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. And this started its the career as a territorial power in 1858. In the wake of the Sepoy Mutiny, the British Crown assumed direct responsibility for the governance of the India. This rule continued until India was granted independence on the August 15, 1947. With independence came the need for a constitution. Hence, a constituent assembly was formed for this purpose in 1946, and on the January 26, 1950, the constitutions came into the being. However, various features of the Indian constitutions and the polity have their roots in the British rule. There were certain events in the British rule that laid down the legal framework for the organization and the functioning of the government and administration in the British India. These events have greatly influenced our constitutions and the polity. They are explained here in the chronological orders year to major headings. The Company Rule 1773 and 1858, the Crown Rule 1858-1947, Company Rule the 1773 to 1858, Regulating Act of the 1773. This act was the great constitutional importance as it was the first step taken by the British governments to control and regulate the affairs of the East India Company in India. It recognized for the first time the political and the administrative functions of the company, and it laid the foundation of the central administration in India. The feature of this act were as follows. It designated the governor of the Bengal as the Governor General Bengal, and the created and the executive council of the four members. To assist him, the first such Governor General was Lord Warren Hastings, and it made the governors of the Bombay and the Madras presidencies subordinate to the Governor General of the Bengal. Unlike earlier, when the three presidencies were independent of one another, It provided it provided for the establishments of a Supreme Court at the Calcutta 1774, compromising one Chief Justice and the three other judges. It prohibited the servants of the company from the engaging in any private trade or accepting the presents of the breach from the natives. It strengthens the control of the British government over the company by the requiring the court of the directors, the governing body of the company, to report on its the revenue, civil and the military affairs in India. Amending Act of 1788 in a bid to rectify the defects of the Regulating Act of 1773. The British Parliament passed the Amending Act of 1781, also known as the Act of the Settlement. Now, sir, we're discussing all the features of the Act were as the follow. It exempts the Governor General and the Council from the jurisdictions of the Supreme Court for the acts done by them in their the official capacity. Similarly, it also exempted the servants of the company from the jurisdictions of the Supreme Court for their official actions. It excluded the revenue matter and the matters arising in the collection of the revenue from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. It provided that the Supreme Court was to have jurisdictions over all the inhabitants of the Calcutta. It also required the court to administer the personal law of the difference. Hindus was to be tried according to the Hindu laws, and the Muslim were to be tried according to the Mohammedan law. It laid down that the appeal from the provincial courts could be taken to the Governor General in the Council and not to the Supreme Court. It empowered the Governor General in the Council to frame the regulations for the provincial courts and the councils. Pitt's India Act of the 1784. The next important act was the Pitt's India Act of the 1784. The features of this act were as follows. The first is distinguish between the commercial and the political functions of the company. It allowed the court of directors to manage the commercial affairs, but created a new body called Board of Control to manage the political affairs. Thus, it established a system of double government. Third, it empowered the Board of Control to the supervise and direct all operation of the civil and the military government or revenues of the British possessions in India. Thus, the act was significant for two reasons. First, the company's territories in India were for the first time called the British possessions in India, and the second, the British government was given the supreme control over companies' affairs and its administration in India. Act of 1786. In 1786, Lord Cornwallis was appointed as the Governor General of Bengal. He placed two demands to accept the post, which he should be given power to override the decision of the council in the special cases. He would also be the commander in chief. Accordingly, the Act of 1786 was enacted to make both the provisions. Chartered Act of the 1793. The feature of this act were as follows. The first, it extended the overriding power given to the Lord Cornwallis over the council to all future governor general, more powers and the control over the governments of the subordinates the presidencies of the Bombay and the Madras. It extended the trade monopoly of the company in India for another period of 20 years, And the fourth, it provided that the commander in chief was not to be a member of the governor general's council unless the was so appointed. The five, it laid down the members of the board of control and their staff were henceforth to be paid out of the Indians' revenues. And the Charter Act of 1813, the features of this act were as follow. It abolished the trade monopoly of the company in India and the Indian state was thrown open to the all British merchants. However, the continued the monopoly of the company over trade and tea and the trade with China. And second, it asserted the sovereignty of the British crown over the company's territories in India. And third, it allowed to the Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of the enlightening the people. And the fourth, it provided for the spread of the Western education among the inhabitants of the British territories in India. And the five, it authorized the local government in India to impose taxes on the persons. They could also punish the person for not paying taxes. And Charter Act of the 1833. This act was the final step towards the centralization in the British India. The features of this act were as follow. It made the Governor General of Bengal as the Governor General of India and vested in him all civil and the military powers. Thus, the act created for the first time Government of India having the authority over the entire territorial area possessed by the British India. Lord William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India and it deprived the governors of the Bombay and the Madras of their the legislative powers. The Governor General of India was given exclusive legislative powers for the entire British India. The laws made under the previous act were called as the regulation, while laws made under this act were called as acts. And the third, it ended the activities of the East India Company as a commercial body, which became a purely administrative body. It provided that the company's territories in India were held by it in trust for His Majesty, his heirs, and the successor. And the fourth, the Charter Act of 1833 attempted to introduce a system of the open competition for the selection of the civil servants and stated that the Indians should not be debarred from the holding any place, office and employment under the company. However, this provision was negated after opposition from the current of the directors and the Charter Act of 1853. This was the last siege of the Charter Act passed by the British Parliament between the 1793 and 1853. It was a significant constitutional landmark. The feature of this act was the follow. It was separated for the first time in the legislative and the executive functions of the Governor General's Council. It provided for the addition of the six new members called the legislative councillors to the council. In other words, the establish a separate Governor General's Legislative Council, which came to be known as the Indian General Legislative Council. This legislative wing of the council functions as the mini parliament, adopting the same procedure as the British Parliament. Thus, the legislation for the first time was treated as a special functions of the government.